The first sign that humanity was not alone came not with fanfare or celebration, but with silence. Every satellite orbiting Earth, Mars, and the outer colonies went dark simultaneously at 0300 Universal Time. Commander Sarachan stood in the observation deck of Fort Armstrong, humanity's primary defensive station positioned at the L4 Lagrange point between Earth and Luna, watching the stars with growing unease. In her 15 years of military service, she had never seen a systems failure this complete, this synchronized. The silence itself screamed danger. "Commander, we're getting intermittent signals back online," Lieutenant Kovacs reported from the communications array, his fingers dancing across holographic displays that flickered with unstable data. "But they're wrong. The telemetry doesn't match any known interference pattern. It's like something reached out and touched every single satellite we have, then let them go." Sarah's jaw tightened. She was a veteran of the resource wars, the brutal conflicts that had nearly torn humanity apart before the Great Unification. She had seen humanity at its worst and then, miraculously, at its best. The species that had almost destroyed itself over water and rare earth minerals had somehow found the wisdom to unite, to reach for the stars together instead of killing each other over the scraps of one world. And now, after barely a century of peace and expansion, something was testing their defenses. "Show me the pattern," she commanded. The main display shifted, showing the entire solar system in miniature. Red dots marked every satellite that had gone dark, and Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized what she was seeing. The blackout had started at the edge of the solar system, beyond Neptune's orbit, and rippled inward in a perfect wave. This wasn't a malfunction. This was a scan. Someone or something had just run their fingers along humanity's communication network like a musician testing piano keys. "Get me Admiral Kuznetsov on priority channel," Sarah ordered. "And go to condition yellow across all stations. This is not a drill." Before Kovacs could respond, every screen in the observation deck blazed with light. Sarah instinctively raised her hand to shield her eyes, then froze as the light coalesced into an image. The figure before them was humanoid, but only in the most generous interpretation of the word. Its body seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, edges blurring and reforming as if reality itself couldn't quite decide what shape it should hold. Where a face should be, there was instead a swirling vortex of colors that human eyes were never meant to process. When it spoke, the voice came not from the speakers but from the air itself, thrumming through the bones of everyone present. "Primitive ones," the voice said, each word precisely enunciated, dripping with condescension. "You have built your small monuments in the darkness and called yourselves mighty. You have spread across 8 worlds and believed yourselves worthy of the void. We are the Kelth Dominion, and we have observed your brief existence with amusement. That amusement has ended." Sarah's hand moved slowly to the emergency combat alert, trying not to draw attention to the movement. Around her, the bridge crew sat frozen, caught between terror and duty. She caught Kovacs' eye and nodded slightly. He understood, his hand moving subtly toward his own station's alerts. The entity continued, unaware or uncaring of their small defiance. "Your solar system occupies a position of strategic value along the galactic corridor. Your star's energy signature is optimal for harvesting. Your worlds contain resources we require. You will evacuate to your primary world within 1 standard rotation. Any resistance will result in your species being reduced to its constituent atoms. We have eliminated 743 civilizations before you. You will not be the exception to our supremacy." The image flickered and vanished as abruptly as it had appeared. For 3 heartbeats, the observation deck remained utterly silent. Then Sarah's fist slammed down on the combat alert, and Fort Armstrong erupted into controlled chaos. Klaxons blared across every human station, from the mining colonies in the asteroid belt to the terraforming outposts on Titan. Across the solar system, humanity's military forces, forged in the fires of their own self-destructive past, awakened like a sleeping predator opening its eyes. Admiral Dmitry Kuznetsov's weathered face appeared on Sarah's screen within minutes. Behind him, she could see the command deck of the UHSV Indomitable, humanity's largest warship, already thrumming with activity. "I saw it too, Commander." Every station, every ship, every settlement received the same message simultaneously. "We're convening the Emergency Defense Council in 10 minutes. I want your tactical assessment ready." "Sir, with respect, we don't have 10 minutes for assessments," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the ice in her veins. "They gave us one rotation. That's 24 hours. Whatever we're going to do, we need to start now." Kuznetsov's eyes hardened with approval. He had commanded carrier groups during the final days of the Resource Wars, had been one of the architects of the Great Unification's military doctrine. If anyone understood the necessity of immediate action, it was him. "Agreed. Initialize Protocol Fortress. Every defensive platform goes hot. Every ship capable of combat gets armed and positioned. Every colony goes to lockdown with evacuation procedures on standby. And Commander Chen, start running simulations. I want to know how to kill something we've never seen before." The next hours blurred together in a frenzy of preparation that humanity had drilled for but never truly believed they would need. The Outer System Defense Network, a web of weapons platforms and sensor arrays that stretched from Mars to Neptune, activated in sequence. Massive rail guns designed to deflect asteroids rotated toward the outer solar system. Nuclear-pumped laser arrays, built under the pretense of clearing space debris, armed their warheads. Humanity had spent a century building infrastructure across the solar system, and they had never forgotten the lessons of their violent past. Every structure humanity built had a secondary purpose. Every tool could become a weapon. On Mars, General Marcus Stone stood in the command center of Olympus Naval Yards, watching as the fruits of humanity's industrial might came to life. The shipyards had been building colony vessels and cargo haulers just hours ago. Now, assembly drones swarmed over every hull, retrofitting civilian ships with armor plating, weapon systems, and military-grade shields. The Martian Colonial Defense Force, often mocked as a ceremonial military more concerned with disaster relief than combat, transformed into something their ancestors would have recognized, an army preparing for war. "General, we have 63 ships in various stages of construction," his chief engineer reported. "None of them are combat-ready, but we can make them dangerous. The question is whether we have time." Marcus studied the holographic display showing the alien message's point of origin. The signal had come from beyond Neptune, which meant the aliens were already inside humanity's solar system. Already past the outer defenses. Already close enough to make good on their threat. "We make time," he said simply. Humanity didn't claw its way up from the mud of Earth just to roll over for the first bully that comes knocking. Get those ships ready to fight. Back on Fort Armstrong, Sarah's tactical team had been running combat simulations for 6 hours straight. The results were universally grim. Lieutenant Rebecca Walsh, Sarah's chief tactical officer, pulled up the latest analysis with hands that trembled slightly from exhaustion and stimulants. "Commander, we have a problem. Actually, we have about 1,000 problems, but this is the big one. We have no idea what we're fighting." "Explain," Sarah said, studying the data flowing across her screens. "The entity that contacted us exists partially out of phase with normal spacetime," Walsh continued. "Our sensors can barely register it. The energy readings we did get suggest technology so far beyond ours that comparison is meaningless. It's like comparing a stone axe to a fusion reactor. And that was just their communication avatar. We have no intelligence on their ships, their weapons, their numbers, or their tactics. Every simulation ends the same way, total human defeat within hours of engagement." Sarah leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for just a moment. She allowed herself exactly 3 seconds of despair, of acknowledging the overwhelming odds and the likelihood that everything humanity had built was about to be swept away like sand castles before a tsunami. Then she opened her eyes, and they burned with stubborn determination. Then we changed the parameters. We can't fight them head-on with conventional tactics. So we don't fight them that way. What do you mean? Walsh asked. Every military force in history has had weaknesses, Sarah explained, her mind racing through centuries of human warfare. The Romans were defeated by guerrilla tactics. The great empires of Earth fell to asymmetric warfare. This Celth dominion has eliminated 743 civilizations, which means they have a doctrine, a standard operating procedure. They're used to winning a certain way. We need to give them something they've never encountered before. Human stubbornness? Walsh suggested with a ghost of a smile. Human creativity, Sarah corrected. Pull up everything we have on unconventional warfare. Every dirty trick, every surprise tactic, every desperate gambit from our entire military history. If we can't out-tech them, we'll outthink them. 18 hours into humanity's deadline, the Celth Dominion fleet materialized at the edge of the solar system. The word fleet was inadequate to describe what emerged from faster-than-light travel in a cascade of exotic particles and twisted space-time. 37 vessels, each one a kilometer-long masterpiece of technology that made humanity's most advanced ships look like children's toys. Their hulls were composed of some material that absorbed light, creating silhouettes of perfect darkness against the stars. Energy readings spiked across every human sensor, showing power outputs that rivaled small stars. Admiral Kuznetsov stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching the enemy fleet's arrival with the cold calculation of a man who had sent thousands to their deaths and carried the weight of those decisions without flinching. Around him, his command staff waited for orders, their faces showing fear but also resolve. Humanity had spent 100 years learning to stand together. They would not break now. All ships, this is Admiral Kuznetsov, he broadcast across the entirety of humanity's military network. In a few hours, we're going to do something that no one in their right mind would consider. We're going to tell those arrogant beings out there that they can't have our home. We're going to fight a war we can't win against an enemy we can't match. And we're going to do it anyway, because that's what humans do. We don't surrender. We don't give up. We adapt, we survive, and we make our enemies regret ever hearing our species' name. He paused, letting his words sink in across 100 ships and stations. They think they know us. They think we're primitives who will scatter at the first show of force. They're about to learn why humanity conquered an entire solar system in less than 2 centuries. They're about to learn why the species that almost destroyed itself in civil war is the worst possible enemy to face. Because we already know how to fight dirty, and we've got nothing left to lose. All ships, take your positions. Humanity closes the door today. The Celth fleet advanced in perfect formation, a geometric pattern of devastating beauty. They made no attempt at stealth, no tactical maneuvers. Why would they? They had crushed 743 civilizations. This would be number 744. Their scanners detected the primitive defense platforms, the laughably simple nuclear weapons, the kinetic weapons that might as well have been spears and rocks. Commodore Zalf, commanding the Dominion fleet, felt something close to pity. These humans had built so much with so little. It was almost a shame to sweep them aside. Deploy harvesting protocols, Zalf commanded. Disable their defensive platforms with minimal force. Leave their primary world intact for evacuation. We shall be merciful in our superiority. The Celth ships unleashed their opening salvo, beams of coherent energy that could slice through planets. They targeted the outer defense platforms first, the ones orbiting Neptune and Uranus. The beams lanced across millions of kilometers in seconds, perfect accuracy, overwhelming power. They struck the platform's dead center. and the platforms exploded in cascades of nuclear fire far larger than they had any right to produce. Commodore Zalth's equivalent of eyebrows would have risen if the Kelth possessed such features. The platforms had been rigged to overload their reactors, turning each one into a massive bomb that filled the space around them with radiation, debris, and electromagnetic chaos. Not enough to damage Kelth shields, but enough to cloud sensors and create visual interference. Crude, barbaric, and completely unexpected. Adjust targeting parameters, Zalth ordered. Continue advance. The fleet pushed forward, and that's when the asteroids started falling. The asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter contained millions of rocks, ranging from pebbles to dwarf planets. Humanity had been mining them for decades, using mass drivers to send refined materials toward the inner planets. Now, those same mass drivers fired rocks toward the Kelth fleet, hundreds of them, each one accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed. They weren't aimed with any precision. They didn't need to be. They just needed to fill space with fast-moving debris, forcing the Kelth fleet to maneuver, to slow down, to engage with the environment instead of just plowing through it. More concerning to Commodore Zalth was what the tactic revealed. These humans weren't fighting for survival. They were fighting to make victory expensive. That suggested a level of tactical sophistication the Dominion's intelligence had not predicted. The Kelth had eliminated 743 civilizations, and every one of them had fought the same way, desperately, reactively, trying to protect their people and their worlds. These humans were being aggressive, proactive, spending resources to create problems rather than hoarding them for defense. Analysis, Zalth demanded. The ship's intelligence responded immediately. Human tactics are consistent with their historical warfare patterns. They frequently employed scorched earth strategies, denial of resources, and acceptance of massive casualties to achieve strategic objectives. Recommend increased caution. This species has experience with extinction-level conflicts. Zalth considered this new information as the fleet carved through the asteroid bombardment with ease. The rocks, even at relativistic speeds, posed no real threat to Kelth shields. But they slowed the advance and used up energy better spent on more important tasks. The humans were making them work for every kilometer of space. Inefficient, but psychologically sound. They were buying time for something. The Kelth fleet reached Mars orbit 22 hours into humanity's deadline. Ahead of them, Earth gleamed blue and white, the precious jewel of the solar system, home to 14 billion humans who had no intention of leaving. Between the Kelth and Earth stood the bulk of humanity's military forces, arranged in a formation that made Commodore Zalth pause. They weren't trying to create a defensive line. They were spread out, scattered across 1 million cubic kilometers of space, with no apparent pattern or strategy. Individual ships, small clusters, separated by vast distances. It was the worst possible defensive formation, making it impossible for them to support each other or concentrate their fire. It made no tactical sense. Which meant it was a trap. Full sensor sweep, Zalth commanded. Identify the threat. The Kelth sensors, capable of detecting quantum fluctuations across light years, swept the space around Earth. They found the human ships, primitive but numerous. They found the defense platforms, already armed and tracking the Kelth fleet. They found the orbital habitats, the space elevators, the infrastructure of a species that had committed everything to reaching for the stars. What they didn't find, until it was too late, were the mines. Humanity had scattered millions of them across the space between Mars and Earth, each one no larger than a basketball, each one coated with materials that absorbed sensor sweeps. They weren't traditional mines with explosives. They were something much simpler and much more devastating, containers of aerogel mixed with metallic particles, designed to disperse into clouds of debris that would clog engines, scratch viewports, and generally make navigation a nightmare. The Kelth fleet hit the first minefield, and suddenly their ships were surrounded by clouds of glittering particles that their shields, designed to deflect energy weapons and solid projectiles, couldn't fully stop. The tiny particles infiltrated thruster systems, covered sensor arrays, and created a fog that disrupted targeting computers. and while the Kelth fleet was distracted, trying to clear the interference, humanity attacked. They didn't come in with guns blazing in dramatic charges. They came in dark and silent, ships running on minimal power, using the debris clouds as cover. They fired missiles that split into hundreds of smaller warheads, overwhelming Kelth point defense systems through sheer numbers. They launched kinetic kill vehicles that had been accelerating for hours, striking with the force of nuclear weapons. They detonated nuclear-pumped lasers at close range, sacrificing the weapons to deliver single devastating shots. The Kelth shields held against the assault, but for the first time in 744 invasions, Commodore Zalth watched their shield percentages actually drop into the double digits on 3 ships. These primitives were hurting them. Not winning, not even close, but making them bleed. Enough, Zalth declared. These creatures will not accept mercy. Show them the futility of resistance. Demonstrate our power. Destroy their moon. The order was calculated cruelty. Humanity's moon was culturally significant, militarily valuable, and home to nearly 1 billion people. Its destruction would break human morale and demonstrate the price of defiance. 3 Kelth dreadnoughts rotated to face Luna, their primary weapons charging with enough energy to crack a planet. On Fort Armstrong, Saracen watched the enemy ships target Luna and felt her heart stop. 1 billion people. Her sister worked on Luna. Her nephew was in school there. 1 billion lives about to end in fire, and she was helpless to stop it. Then Admiral Kuznetsov's voice cut through her despair, calm and cold as the void itself. Execute Operation Doorslam. And humanity showed the Kelth Dominion exactly what it meant to make humans angry. Operation Doorslam had been conceived during the darkest hours of the Resource Wars, when military strategists realized that humanity's greatest weakness was also their greatest strength. They were emotional, irrational, and willing to sacrifice everything for what they believed in. The plan had been refined, updated, and hidden in classified files for a century, waiting for the day when humanity faced an existential threat from beyond their world. That day had arrived, and Admiral Kuznetsov activated it without hesitation. The 3 Kelth dreadnoughts charging their weapons to destroy Luna never completed their firing sequence. The moon's surface erupted with light as every mass driver, every mining laser, and every piece of industrial equipment that could be weaponized fired simultaneously. But they weren't aiming at the Kelth ships. They were aimed at Luna itself, at specific points calculated decades ago by paranoid military planners who had asked themselves one terrible question: how do you deny the enemy a strategic asset you can't defend? Hundreds of precision strikes hit fault lines, weak points in Luna's geological structure, all within a 3-second window. The moon shuddered. Massive plumes of regolith exploded into space, creating an expanding cloud of dust and debris that engulfed the Kelth dreadnoughts. But more importantly, the strikes triggered the activation of something humanity had spent 20 years building in absolute secrecy: a network of massive gravitational pulse generators buried kilometers beneath Luna's surface. Dr. Jennifer Zhao's voice came through every command channel, speaking from the deep bunkers beneath Luna's surface where she and her team had worked in isolation for 2 decades. Gravitational pulse in 3, 2, 1, now. The generators activated, and space itself screamed. The devices didn't generate gravity in the traditional sense. They created rapid fluctuations in local spacetime, ripples that propagated outward like shockwaves. The technology was based on theoretical physics that humanity barely understood, built with resources that had bankrupted entire planetary economies, and tested exactly 0 times before this moment because activating it could potentially tear Luna apart. It worked perfectly. The gravitational pulses slammed into the 3 Kelth dreadnoughts like invisible hammers. Their shields, designed to deflect energy and matter, had no defense against the fundamental fabric of spacetime being distorted around them. The massive ships tumbled out of formation, their exotic propulsion systems unable to compensate for gravity that was pulling in 6 different directions simultaneously. Warning signals cascaded through Kelth systems as the ship's delicate dimensional phasing technology, which allowed them to exist partially out of sync with normal space, was forcibly disrupted. Commodore Zalth experienced something they had not felt in 300 cycles of conquest: fear. Emergency jump. Get us out of this spatial distortion. But humanity had planned for that too. The gravitational pulses weren't just weapons, they were anchors. The same distortions that were battering the Kelth ships made faster-than-light travel impossible within 1,000,000 kilometers of Luna. The Kelth fleet was trapped in the solar system, forced to fight at speeds and distances where humanity's primitive weapons could actually reach them. Saracen didn't waste the opportunity. All ships, focus fire on the dreadnoughts. They're vulnerable. Tactical pattern forlorn hope. The human fleet, scattered and seemingly disorganized, suddenly revealed the method behind the madness. Every ship had been positioned precisely to create overlapping fields of fire on the stricken dreadnoughts. The formation that had looked like chaos was actually a carefully designed kill zone. Hundreds of ships opened fire simultaneously, missiles and kinetic rounds and laser beams all converging on 3 targets that couldn't maneuver and couldn't escape. The first dreadnought's shields collapsed under the sustained bombardment. Human weapons, primitive and simple compared to Kelth technology, punched through the hull in dozens of places. Atmosphere vented into space. Internal explosions rippled through the massive vessel. It didn't explode dramatically like in old entertainment videos, it simply broke apart, sections separating as structural integrity failed, tumbling away into the void as debris. Across the Kelth fleet, shock rippled through the collective consciousness. They had lost a dreadnought. One of their most powerful vessels had been destroyed by primitives using weapons that shouldn't have been able to scratch their shields. Commodore Zalth felt the emotional resonance of 7,000 crew members dying, their consciousness fragmenting as their physical forms ceased to exist. The Kelth were a long-lived species, and they were not accustomed to death on this scale. All ships, combat dispersal pattern, Zalth commanded, forcing calm into their thoughts. These creatures are more dangerous than anticipated. Treat them as a peer-level threat. Authorization to use unrestricted force. The Kelth fleet, finally taking humanity seriously, unleashed its full might. Energy beams that could bore through planets lanced across space. Missiles that bent physics fired from hidden launch tubes. Weapons that humanity had no names for tore at reality itself. 23 human ships vanished in the first salvo, erased so completely that not even wreckage remained. 17 more suffered catastrophic damage, their crews fighting desperate damage control battles as life support failed and reactors threatened to breach. On Mars, General Marcus Stone watched the battle unfold with the cold certainty that humanity was still losing. They had drawn blood, yes, but the Kelth fleet was adapting, learning, becoming more efficient at killing humans with every passing minute. The retrofitted civilian ships launching from Olympus naval yards were brave and their crews were willing, but they would be slaughtered if they entered that combat zone. "General, the fleet needs reinforcements," his tactical officer urged. "We have 60 ships ready to launch." "No," Marcus said firmly. "We send them up there now, they die for nothing. We wait for the right moment." He studied the tactical displays, watching the patterns of battle, looking for the opportunity he knew would come. Humanity's entire strategy was based on one fundamental principle: their enemies were too powerful to defeat through conventional warfare, so they wouldn't fight conventionally. Every engagement was designed to teach the Kelth wrong lessons, to make them expect one thing while humanity prepared another. Back in the combat zone, the second and third dreadnoughts had recovered from the gravitational pulse, their advanced systems compensating for the spatial distortions. They moved to rejoin the main fleet, weapons charging to exact revenge for their fallen sister ship. The gravitational pulse generators on Luna had exhausted their power reserves, that trick wouldn't work twice. The Kelth fleet was adapting, spreading out to avoid concentrated fire, using their superior sensors to track human ships before they could get into effective range. Admiral Kuznetsov watched his forces being methodically dismantled and allowed himself a grim smile. "Commander Chen, execute Protocol Ember. All outer system stations, you are weapons free." Sarah had been waiting for those words. Acknowledged. Initiating Protocol Ember now. For the past 22 hours, while the Kelth fleet had been advancing through the solar system and the main battle had been developing near Earth, humanity had been moving assets into position in the outer system. Not military assets, because those would have been detected and destroyed. Instead, they had repositioned mining ships, cargo haulers, refinery stations, ice miners from the outer moons, all civilian vessels doing exactly what they normally did. The Kelth sensors had noted them and dismissed them as irrelevant. That was a mistake. Every civilian ship in the outer solar system had been modified with weapons over the past day, crude but effective systems bolted onto hulls designed for peaceful purposes. More importantly, they had been loaded with every gram of fissionable material humanity could gather from the outer colonies. Hundreds of civilian vessels, each one now a mobile weapons platform, began accelerating toward the inner system using trajectories calculated to bring them into the battle space over the next hours. But that wasn't the immediate threat. The immediate threat was the refinery stations orbiting Saturn and Jupiter. These massive installations processed gas scooped from the giant planets' atmospheres, separating hydrogen isotopes for fusion reactors across the solar system. Each station held hundreds of thousands of tons of hydrogen in various states of compression and confinement. Station crews had spent the past day reconfiguring containment systems, turning their facilities into the largest fusion bombs ever created. The stations had skeleton crews now, just enough people to make the final adjustments and arm the triggers. Commander Pavel Rostov stood on the bridge of Titan Refinery Station 7, looking at the massive fuel tanks his crew had spent 18 hours turning into a weapon that would be visible from light years away. His crew of 12 stood at their stations, hands ready on controls, faces showing the calm acceptance of those who had already made peace with their fate. Admiral Kuznetsov, this is Rostov on Titan 7. We are ready. Fusion triggers are armed. Guidance systems are active. Just give the word, sir. Kuznetsov's face appeared on the screen, and Pavel saw something in the Admiral's eyes he had never seen before, deep, profound sorrow mixed with unbending resolve. Commander Rostov, you and your people are the bravest souls humanity has ever produced. We will remember you. We will tell your story for as long as our species exists. Thank you for closing the door. Pavel nodded, feeling strangely calm. He had a wife on Earth, 2 daughters in university on Mars. They would live because of what he was about to do. That was enough. It has been an honor, Admiral. Titan 7, initiating final approach. The refinery station's massive engines, designed to maintain orbital position, fired at full power. The entire facility, 15 kilometers of industrial infrastructure and enough fusion fuel to power a planet for a century, began falling toward Saturn. Guidance thrusters made constant corrections, aiming for a very specific trajectory. The Kelth fleet's sensors registered the station's movement and classified it as a malfunction, not worth attention when they were engaged in combat with an unexpectedly resilient foe. They realized their error when the station achieved escape velocity from Saturn and began accelerating toward the inner system. Even then, it seemed like a desperate, futile gesture. A slow-moving station could never threaten their fleet. They could destroy it from 1,000,000 kilometers away. Then the station's fusion triggers activated, and Commander Rostov and his crew of 12 became light itself. The explosion was beyond measure. Centuries of fusion fuel detonated in a cascade reaction that briefly created a new star in the solar system. The shockwave expanded at a significant fraction of light speed, a wall of superheated plasma and hard radiation that scoured everything in its path. The Kelth fleet was nowhere near the detonation, safely positioned in the inner system, but that had never been the point. The blast created an electromagnetic pulse that washed over the entire solar system, disrupting sensors and communications. More importantly, the expanding plasma cloud was dense enough and energetic enough to affect the gravitational distortions around Luna. The two effects combined, creating a massive region of space where physics became unpredictable and navigation became guesswork. And in that chaos, humanity struck from every direction at once. The civilian ships from the outer system, which the Kelth had dismissed as irrelevant, dropped their pretense and revealed themselves as weapons platforms. They fired every missile, every nuclear warhead, every kinetic kill vehicle they carried, then turned their ships into missiles themselves, ramming Kelth vessels at speeds that turned metal into plasma. Station crews throughout the asteroid belt detonated their own facilities, creating expanding clouds of debris and radiation that further confused Kelth sensors. Most devastatingly, the human fleet that had seemed to be retreating in disarray suddenly reversed course and charged directly at the Kelth formation. Admiral Kuznetsov stood on the bridge of the Indomitable as his flagship led the assault, watching the range close with terrifying speed. This was it. This was the moment where humanity either proved they belonged among the stars or died trying. All weapons, continuous fire, he commanded. Navigation, evasive pattern delta. Engineering, give me everything the reactors have. We're going through them. The Indomitable shuddered as every weapon system fired at once. Missiles erupted from launch tubes in rapid sequence. Rail guns hurled depleted uranium rounds at relativistic speeds. Laser arrays carved light through the darkness. The massive warship plunged into the Kelth formation like an ancient battleship charging enemy lines, and behind it, the entire human fleet followed in a wedge formation designed for one purpose: to break through the enemy line and cause chaos. Commodore Zalf watched the human charge with growing disbelief. This was suicide. The Kelth fleet's weapons would tear them apart before they crossed half the distance. These primitives were sacrificing themselves for nothing, giving in to emotion and abandoning reason. All ships, focused fire. Destroy their flagship. Break their formation. But the human formation didn't break. Ships exploded, yes, torn apart by Kelth weapons that unleashed the power of stars. The destroyer Vigilant vanished in a flash of light. The cruiser Defiant broke in half, both sections continuing forward under momentum even as their crews died. The carrier Resolute took a direct hit that carved through its hull from bow to stern, yet its remaining weapons kept firing even as the ship came apart. And for every human ship that died, they took Kelth vessels with them. Not through superior firepower, but through sheer savage determination. Damaged human ships didn't retreat, they accelerated toward the nearest Kelth vessel and rammed. Human crews with minutes to live before life support failed used those minutes to fire every weapon they had. Captains who knew their reactors were breaching deliberately pushed them into overload and steered toward enemy ships, turning their vessels into multi-megaton bombs. The Kelth had eliminated 743 civilizations, but they had never faced anything like this. Species fought for survival, yes, but rationally. They surrendered when the odds became impossible. They tried to preserve what they could. They didn't transform every resource, every advantage, every asset including their own lives into weapons and throw everything into a battle they couldn't win. Humanity did. The Indomitable reached the Kelth line, and Admiral Kuznetsov's voice rang out across every human channel, ramming speed. For Earth. For humanity. For everyone we've ever loved. The flagship's main engines went to emergency power, acceleration pressing everyone aboard into their seats with crushing force. The massive warship, designed to be humanity's mobile fortress and symbol of their unity, aimed directly at a Kelth dreadnought. Kuznetsov's hands gripped his command chair as alarms screamed and his crew worked with desperate efficiency. He thought of his husband in Moscow, his grandchildren who had just started school. They would live. That was all that mattered. The Kelth dreadnought tried to evade, but the Indomitable was too close, too fast. The human flagship struck the alien vessel amidships at a significant fraction of light speed. The collision released energy equivalent to multiple nuclear weapons. Both ships tore apart, metal screaming as forces that no hull could withstand ripped through bulkheads and reactors. Admiral Dmitry Kuznetsov died instantly, along with 3,000 crew members who had followed him into the fire without hesitation. The Kelth dreadnought broke in half, both sections tumbling away, secondary explosions rippling through their length. Two of the fleet's most powerful vessels, destroyed in a single moment of calculated sacrifice. On Fort Armstrong, Saracen watched her mentor die and felt tears streaming down her face even as her hands continued working the tactical controls. There was no time to grieve. Kuznetsov had given them an opening. She had to use it. All remaining ships, exploit the gap. Get inside their formation. Make them fight close where their range advantage doesn't matter. The human fleet, reduced to barely 40% strength, poured through the gap the Indomitable had created. At close range, Kelth ships couldn't fire their most powerful weapons without risking friendly fire. Their targeting systems, designed for precision at extreme distances, struggled with the chaos of a close-quarters melee. Their shields, optimized against directed energy, were less effective against physical ramming and point-blank nuclear detonations. It was still a losing battle by any objective measure. The Kelth had superior technology, superior shields, superior weapons. But Commodore Zalth was beginning to realize that superiority didn't matter if your enemy was willing to pay any price for victory. 7 more Kelth ships fell to human attacks, each one costing multiple human vessels but falling nonetheless. The exchange rate was unsustainable. Humanity couldn't win through attrition. But they weren't trying to win through attrition. They were trying to teach the Kelth a lesson. On Mars, General Marcus Stone finally saw the moment he had been waiting for. The Kelth fleet, forced into close combat with the remnants of Earth's defenders, had consolidated their formation. They were packed relatively close together, supporting each other with overlapping fields of fire. It was good tactics against a conventional enemy. It was exactly what Marcus needed. Launch all ships, he commanded. Execute Operation Anvil. Navigation, plot the jump. The 60 retrofitted civilian ships launched from Mars orbit in perfect synchronization. But they weren't heading for Earth. They were heading for the gravitational catapult point humanity had prepared between Mars and Jupiter, a region where the gravitational fields of both planets, the Sun, and several carefully positioned asteroids created a slingshot effect. The fleet hit the catapult at precisely the right angle and velocity, and gravity did what gravity does best. It accelerated them to speeds that no human pilot could survive without the experimental inertial dampeners they had been testing. The Martian fleet arrived at Earth faster than should have been possible for vessels of their mass. They emerged from behind Luna, using the gravitational distortions still rippling through local space to mask their approach until the last possible moment. Each ship carried a single weapon, a prototype gravitational implosion device based on the same technology as Luna's pulse generators, but designed to collapse inward rather than pulse outward. The ships didn't try to engage the Kelth fleet in combat. They simply positioned themselves around the enemy formation in a spherical pattern, locked their navigation to maintain position relative to the Kelth flagship, and armed their weapons. Marcus's voice cut through the chaos of battle, calm and final. Commodore Zalth of the Kelth Dominion, this is General Marcus Stone of the Martian Colonial Defense Force. You came to our home and told us to leave. You threatened to reduce us to atoms. You tried to destroy our moon. I want you to understand something. Humanity has already fought our apocalypse. We've already looked extinction in the face during our resource wars. We know what it's like to lose everything. And we decided that we would rather die free than live as refugees in our own solar system. He paused, watching the tactical display where 60 ships surrounded the Kelth fleet in a perfect sphere. The devices my ships are carrying will create a gravitational collapse field. Everything within 200,000 kilometers will be compressed to a fraction of its size. Your ships, my ships, probably a few of our own defensive platforms that are too close. We'll all die together. Or you can leave. You can take your fleet and go find another solar system to harvest, one where the locals are more accommodating. You have 60 seconds to decide. Commodore Zalth's sensors confirmed what the human claimed. The energy signatures surrounding the fleet matched the gravitational weapons that had disabled their dreadnoughts earlier. Except these were configured differently, designed to implode rather than pulse. If they activated, the entire Kelth fleet would be crushed. Their shields couldn't protect against gravitational forces that strong. For the first time in 744 invasions, Commodore Zalth considered retreat. The Kelth had lost 4 dreadnoughts, 11 cruisers, and 23 support vessels. More importantly, they had lost the certainty of victory. These humans weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to punish, to make the cost of conquest so high that it wasn't worth paying. Why? Zalf transmitted directly to General Stone. You cannot win. We could call for reinforcements. We could return with a fleet 10 times this size. Your resistance is ultimately futile. Marcus smiled grimly. Maybe it is. But you'll have to explain to your superiors how you lost a quarter of your fleet to primitives using gravitational weapons you didn't know we had. You'll have to tell them that humanity has this technology and we're not afraid to use it. And you'll have to answer the question, if we're this dangerous now, what are we going to be like in 100 years? In 1,000 years? Are you really sure you want humanity as an enemy? The silence stretched for 30 seconds. 40. 50. At 58 seconds, the Kelth fleet began to withdraw, moving away from the gravitational trap that surrounded them. They moved slowly, maintaining weapon locks on human ships, ready to resume combat if this was a trick. But the human ships didn't fire. They simply waited, weapons armed, until the Kelth fleet had cleared the danger zone. Once free, Commodore Zalf sent one final transmission. You have won nothing, primitives. We leave because the harvest is not worth the cost, not because we fear you. But know this, the Kelth Dominion has a long memory. We will remember your defiance. Saracen, now the ranking military officer after Admiral Kuznetsov's sacrifice, replied from Fort Armstrong. Good. Remember us. Remember that humanity doesn't surrender. Remember that we turned our own moon into a weapon. Remember that we made you retreat. And tell every other species in the galaxy that Earth and her solar system are closed. We don't want your wars, your politics, or your conquests. Leave us alone, and we'll leave you alone. But if you come here looking for a fight, we'll give you one you'll never forget. The Kelth fleet activated their faster-than-light drives the moment they cleared the gravitational distortions. Reality bent around their ships, exotic particles streaming in their wake, and then they were gone, vanished back into the vast darkness between stars. For several long moments, humanity held its collective breath, waiting to see if it was really over. Then the cheering started. It began on Fort Armstrong, spreading through the surviving ships and stations. On Earth, 14 billion people watched the alien fleet disappear and erupted in celebration. On Mars, General Stone allowed himself to slump in his chair, the weight of command and the certainty of death finally lifting from his shoulders. On Luna, Dr. Zhao and her team emerged from their bunkers to find their moon intact and their world saved. The cost had been terrible. 50,000 military personnel dead, including Admiral Kuznetsov and countless heroes whose names would be engraved on monuments across the solar system. 15 major warships destroyed, along with hundreds of smaller vessels. Commander Rostov and his crew, who had turned Titan Station 7 into a weapon of magnificent destruction. The countless civilians who had volunteered to retrofit ships, arm weapons, or simply maintain essential services while the world they knew hung in the balance. But humanity had survived. More than survived, they had won. Not through superior technology or firepower, but through the stubborn refusal to accept defeat that had characterized their species since the first human picked up a stick to defend their family. 3 days after the battle, Saracen stood in what remained of Fort Armstrong's observation deck, looking out at the stars. The station had taken damage during the fighting, and repair crews were still working around the clock to restore full functionality. But they would rebuild. That's what humans did. Commander Chen, a voice said behind her. She turned to find General Stone's face on a communication screen, projected from Mars. The Emergency Defense Council has convened. In light of Admiral Kuznetsov's, in light of recent events, we need someone to coordinate the military recovery and reorganization. The vote was unanimous. If you'll accept, we'd like you to take the Admiral's position. Sarah looked out at the stars again, thinking of all they had lost and all they had protected. Somewhere out there, the Kelth were licking their wounds and probably debating whether to return. And beyond them, who knew how many other species might come to test humanity's defenses? I accept, she said quietly. On one condition. We don't wait for the next threat to show up. We prepare. We expand our defenses. We develop new technologies. And we make absolutely certain that if anyone else comes to our solar system looking for conquest, they get the same answer the Kelf did. Marcus nodded approvingly. Agreed. What do you propose? Sarah's reflection in the observation window showed a woman who had aged a decade in 3 days, but whose eyes burned with unshakable determination. We close the door properly. We build defense stations at the edge of the solar system. We develop that gravitational technology into something we can deploy fleet-wide. We make contact with other species on our terms, not theirs. And we make sure the entire galaxy knows, humanity is here, we're not going anywhere, and we're done being victims. She paused, then added with a slight smile, also, we're going to need a new flagship. I think we should name it the Kuznetsov. He'd have hated the attention, which means he'd have loved it. The Kuznetsov it is, Marcus agreed. Welcome to command, Admiral Chen. Now let's get to work. We've got a solar system to defend and a galaxy to meet. And I have a feeling they're going to be very surprised by us. Across the solar system, humanity began the long process of recovery and rebuilding. But they did so with new purpose, new unity, and new certainty. They had faced the darkness between the stars and stared it down. They had closed the door on those who would take their home, and they had done it the only way humanity knew how, with courage, creativity, and an absolute refusal to give up. The Kelf Dominion had eliminated 743 civilizations. But they had failed to make it 744. Earth and her solar system stood defiant, a closed door that would not open for conquest. And behind that door, humanity prepared for whatever came next, knowing one fundamental truth that they had proven in fire and sacrifice. When you threaten humanity's home, humanity doesn't surrender. They make you regret asking. The solar system was theirs, and they intended to keep it that way. The end.